Okay, so I believe we will start diving into the webinar. So again, hello everyone, welcome to Let's Talk Medical School, where we will be speaking with 5 medical school students about their journey. So my name is Michelle, and I'm an incoming third-year student at Western University, currently studying medical sciences, and I will be the panel moderator or MC for this afternoon. So before we begin, I wanted to introduce the organization behind this webinar, which is the Golden Age Village of the Elderly. So Golden Age Village of the Elderly, or GAVE, is a nonprofit charity that strives to provide affordable housing as well as long-term care facilities for Vietnamese Canadian seniors by building a campus of care. Most Vietnamese seniors in the GTA speak very minimal English, and they report Vietnamese as their spoken language at home. So GAVE recognizes this and that culture is very important for living as a Vietnamese Canadian senior. And as such, they aim to provide an environment for them where they can be the most comfortable, including food, languages, and people they can recognize. So the campus of care will foster a diverse community that is determined to meet and exceed the cultural needs of its residents. So on top of that, the Golden Age Village of the Elderly likes to support the Vietnamese Canadian community as a whole by supporting the community's youth through projects such as this webinar today. So to support our cause, you can please feel free to continue to consider donating by visiting the organization's website at www.goldenagevillage.com, and I will be sending this link into the chat. Feel free to, I highly encourage you to check out the website for more information in the future. Okay, so today our group of panelists will discuss the whole journey it takes to become a doctor, from applying to medical school itself, and what happens afterwards. So the panel aims to inform you of all that is required to become a doctor, so you can be certain that a doctor is the career for you. And as a note, we'll be having an open Q&A period at the end, so if you check the chat, there is a doc to record any questions you may have. So now let's meet our lovely panelists. So perhaps everyone can share what school you study at, what year or job you're currently in, and what year did you get accepted to medical school. So perhaps let's start with Quynh. Or actually, let's start from younger to older, my bad. So I believe first, is that Carolyn?
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Carolyn. I was accepted into medical school last year in 2020. So I'm entering my second year now at Western. So hopefully I don't forget too much about the application process and all that and can give you guys some insight.
Thank you, Carolyn, very exciting. Next up, I believe, is Justin, if I'm correct.
Hi everyone, my name is Justin. I'm at Mac and I'm entering my 3rd or final year. So before applying to Mac, I studied human physiology at Western and I applied after my 3rd year, and I was fortunate to get in after 3rd year, and I also graduated because I had fulfilled my course requirements.
Awesome, thank you, Justin. Next up, we have Maxwell.
Hey everyone, I'm Max. I studied health sciences in McMaster for my undergrad and started medical school at U of T in 2017. And now finished medical school, thankfully, and I'm a first-year resident at U of T in public health and preventative medicine.
Awesome. And last but not least, Quynh.
Hi, thank you for joining us, everyone. My name is Quynh. I studied life sciences at Queen's prior to my life in medical school. I did a master's in epidemiology and worked in public health, and then went to medical school in 2013 at the University of Toronto. I recently finished my residency, and Max and I can speak more about what that is later on in the panel. But I'm a family physician in training right now. So by training, so I recently finished last year my residency.
Awesome, thank you, Quynh. And so sorry, someone mentioned that the Google Doc is not currently being able to be edited, but we will have someone fix it, I believe. Perhaps Michelle Tran send a new link in the chat soon. Okay, so in the meantime, let's have a nice warm-up question for our panelists, and that is, why did you choose medicine as a career? Maybe we'll start with the same order as before. So I'll start with Carolyn again. Sorry, Carolyn. I think you're actually on mute by accident.
Oh, no, sorry. I think my internet cut out for a second there. Did you ask why we chose to go into medicine?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. So I think for me, it started out with the exposure of the need for healthcare. I'm from a pretty small town in Chatham. So every time there would be someone sick, we'd always have to like ship them off to London, be really emergent, and it'd be a pretty big scare because London's close, but not that close if you have a medical emergency. So seeing that, I was kind of, and I love my hometown, I love Chatham. So I was kind of inspired to make a difference in my own community and through healthcare, just because when you live somewhere where you know everyone, you can tell like the major differences it makes in someone's lives. So that's what initially got me interested in medicine.
That's really nice, Carolyn. It's really sweet to hear that. Okay, so next up we have Justin.
Yeah, that's a question that I guess all of us reflect on all the time. And I think for me, there's no epiphany moment where I knew medicine was right for me. And even to this day, everyone should still question that. So to be honest, I think a lot of it started with parents' pressure. And as a child, you don't really know much. Their parents are guiding you in a certain way and you just go for it. You try hard to make them proud. I think I started thinking about healthcare specifically more in high school. Not necessarily medicine, but I was a student athlete. I used to run competitively, and firsthand, I learned the importance of the mind-body connection. So I was thinking about recovery, nutrition, and exercise physiology, and that was really important to me on a personal level. And of course, in school, I did well in sciences, particularly biology. And from there, I decided to study physiology and pharmacology at Western. And then, so intellectually, that was really stimulating. And I also had a period of time in university when I got really sick, and kind of navigating the healthcare system as a patient is a very different experience than as a provider. And I had some great doctors and I had some experiences with some not so great doctors, and kind of led me to further reflect on kind of what person would I want to be in the future if I was to help someone in the same place. And so I guess in summary, it wasn't really one moment. It was a long journey of trial and honestly just living my life, going with the flow, and then realizing slowly that maybe this would be the right path for me.
I think that's great. I definitely agree that choosing to go in this career path is definitely not an easy choice. So it's great that you mentioned how important constant reflection is. So thank you, Justin. So now we'll go on to Maxwell.
Yeah, I think, I really like this question because everyone's answers are so diverse, and I encourage everyone in the audience to also think about, how you relate to this question too in your journey. Like Justin said, I think it's a myriad of experiences, but for me, one thing that was true from the beginning is I've always really enjoyed writing and the arts. I write a lot of poetry, short stories. One big theme actually is, about my experiences as a Vietnamese Canadian, and also my parents' experiences and our whole family's experience. But during my undergrad degree, I had a chance to take a lot of courses in literature and in writing, and I had a chance to explore narratives of health and illness, and became really interested in patient stories and also the stories of healthcare providers, doctors, other members of the healthcare team. And so that was a big motivating factor for me to pursue medicine, is to learn more about those stories firsthand in a very intimate way, and also to help shape those stories in whichever way I can. And so that's something still working on now.
Thanks for sharing, Maxwell. So now we'll move on to Quynh.
I love hearing this question, and I've gone through it myself, asking myself when I started this journey. During my medical school training, I've sat on panels and reviewed applications for OMSAS, as well as interview medical students, as well as residents. So I hear the answer to this question so often. And yet I feel so inspired every time I hear about it from people, who I've known briefly, but not so much about. And I love that Max brought in the arts and science of medicine. A lot of us go into medicine I, similar to Justin, have always been drawn to science. I think I've always at a young age knew that science, I was going to do something in science. And originally my interest was in research particularly. And the more that I engage in research and scientific writing, the more I felt like I was missing a piece of my career. That is, I could write reports and translation pieces to encourage people to walk and physical activity for their health. But I feel like I was missing a connection with the person. And how do we make behavioral changes at the personal level? And I think that was when there was a slight change in terms of how I wanted to structure my career. I wanted to include medicine as part of it. As a family doctor, I think one of the greatest privilege that I have is hearing people's stories, people's experiences. I get to have the privilege of having people tell me some of their most vulnerable moments, some of their secrets that they don't tell their closest people in their life, but they tell their doctors, and I think that's what keeps me going in this career path. And I always reflect on why I'm here at every stage in your career. You reflect on what brought you to this point and where do you go next. And so I'm at a big transition in my career right now, finishing residency. I've been in school for a long time, and that's my identity as a student. And now it's kind of like, where do I go from here as a staff? Like everybody's like, this is the moment that you get to, so now what? And to this day, I still look back and it's kind of like, I went into medicine because of the human connection, because at the heart of medicine is about the connections that we make with people, with the population, and how do we help people navigate their most joyous moments in life, their most vulnerable moments in life, and some of their saddest moments in life. And while we're there, how do we enable the individual, the population, to have a healthy, fulfilling quality of life? And that's what I strive for, and that's what motivates me to continue doing what I do.
Thank you, Quynh. That was a very insightful answer. And based on all of these answers, I can say I would trust all of you guys to be my physician. So be sure to hit me up once you guys graduate or finish, or I guess except for Quynh. So thank you. As a side note for the audience, if you guys want a better view of each speaker, you can feel free to go onto the view mode and press speaker, so you'll be able to see the video of the speaker a bit more clearer. So onto the body, I guess, of our discussion topics today. I think we will begin with the MCAT. So as we know that the MCAT is something that's very highly talked about in the medical school journey. And what it is a standardized test that will cover subjects from chemistry to physics, biology, biochemistry, and so much more. So the first question for our panelists is, I guess, how long should you prepare for the MCAT? Perhaps Carolyn would like to start us off.
Yeah, no problem. I think this, and I think I might say this a lot throughout this panel, but it's really a personal thing. I think with the MCAT, it depends a lot on your baseline knowledge. If you took a science undergrad versus an arts undergrad, you might have a bit more of a footing in the things that the MCAT tests for. Typically, I'd say if you were dedicating all your time to it, like as if it was like a full-time job, 1 to 3 months seems typical in the spheres that I was in, at least. But of course, there's time restraints, like financial restraints that might not make that possible for everyone. There's also something I used was the AAMC resources, and they let you make a study plan on your own, personalized to how much time you have or how much time you can dedicate to it. I can put the link in the chat if you guys want it. I found it really helpful, and just to keep yourself on track with your own studying. For me, I did 3 months after my 4th year ended in May, and then I took my MCAT in August.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Seems like a great resource. Next question we have is, I guess, as addition to Carolyn, how in general did you prepare for the MCAT? And perhaps maybe Max or Carolyn, you guys can elaborate on this as well.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think what Carolyn said is very true. Like everyone is different and what works for one person might not work for the next. But some of the strategies I found personally helpful were studying with other people. Luckily at Mac, there was a lot of us who were writing the MCAT at the same time. And so we formed some study groups and were able to practice with each other. And for me, you know, I struggle with studying alone. I need a bit more structure in my life. So that was very helpful. And then the other thing that I found helpful is just doing a lot of practice questions and as many practice tests as I could. As much as it's helpful to learn the theory and do as much reading as you can, at some point you have to start practicing because you know, you want to simulate the environment on test day. And so using the resources that Carolyn suggested, or there's tons of free resources online as well. Khan Academy, I think, still has some practice MCAT questions. So that's something I would recommend too.
That's awesome. Thank you, Max. And for anybody, I guess, what would you consider a good score? And in general, did anyone end up using any MCAT prep courses? And would they recommend it? Perhaps, yeah, Max, go ahead.
Yeah, I can address the first part of that, which, you know, obviously the best score is the highest score that you can get. But I think generally speaking, to maximize your chances at different medical schools, I would say to aim for at least 125 in each of the sections of the MCAT. And in particular, a lot of schools such as Mac and I think Calgary place a lot more emphasis on CARS in particular. That's sort of the reading comprehension type section of the test. And so if you get at least 125 in all sections and try to aim for a really high CARS score, that probably maximizes your chances in general.
Thank you. And perhaps, Carolyn, would you want to provide any insight on any MCAT prep courses, or if you thought they were necessary or not for your studying?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with what Maxwell said in that, you know, the CARS really has a greater emphasis for some schools like Mac and Calgary. And if you do well on CARS, it usually translates pretty nicely to CASPER too, which you have to do for a lot of medical schools too. In terms of prep courses, I personally didn't take one because of the time restraints in it. And it was pretty much like a full time. You go to class at 8, you come back at 4, and you study all the same things at the same time. If you do like structure, I think it is a good idea if you can afford it. But I would also keep in mind that everyone goes at the same pace. So if you're really strong in biology and not that strong in physics, they're not going to give you more time to study physics and biology. Everyone's just going to go the same pace. So I would keep that in mind if you're considering the prep courses. I think more important than any prep courses is, like what Max said, to do practice full lengths, and make sure that you understand and review your mistakes. Anything that you do, as long as you understand where you went wrong, it's not like you have to redo the question, but that logic will bring you miles farther in doing future questions. I didn't really do, like I said, I didn't do a prep course, but I did kind of an everyday thing, which was the CARS Jack Weston passages. I went to look at the site earlier today before coming here, and it looks a lot nicer than just 2 years ago than when I was using it. It looks like they have like courses for CARS strategy and all that. So I'm not too familiar with that, but I do know that the passages are really reflective of what you would get on the MCAT. So I would strongly suggest those.
Thank you, Carolyn. Quynh, do you have an extra comment?
Yeah, I think just something additional to add is that, like any standardized test, one component is the content, and those of us who come from kind of a science undergrad background do have had exposure to that content. But a big part of the MCAT is the endurance, is test taking. And so that's why it's so important. Max and Carolyn mentioned, you know, actually getting access to those full length and making yourself sit there and do the structure, take the breaks, just as it is on test day. Because I think a lot of times it's kind of the test taking strategy that some of us and some candidates have trouble with on test day. So actually practicing that as well.
Thank you, Quynh. That's a good point. For those who don't know, the MCAT is actually a very long test. In total, it takes around, I think, 7.5 hours, that including breaks and some other administrative duties, but it definitely is a test of endurance. So thank you everyone for your insights. We'll be moving on to our next topic of discussion, which includes extracurricular experiences. Because as we know, medical schools tend to look at a holistic view of the applicant, and this includes things they're involved in outside of academics. So a question for the panelists is, what kind of extracurricular activities did you do? Are there any particular activities would you recommend? And I guess, especially with COVID, I guess, how would you recommend our applicants find opportunities for the future? So maybe if Justin, would you like to share any thoughts on this one?
Sure. I think before I go into the specifics, though, I just want to make sure that I think we should all be clear that none of what we talk about is prescriptive. It's important to learn from us. I guess we are in this field already, but nothing we say is exactly how it should be for each of you. Everyone's different. Everyone has a different journey, and that's important to remember. But I guess in general, volunteering is important for several reasons. I mean, I think the easier and more convenient answer is, oh, you get to serve the community and help other people. Truthfully, for me, it was probably more of a selfish and honest answer. I'm improving myself as a person, learning about myself, developing hobbies or interests that I didn't have before, and then building skills. So communication skills, honestly becoming a more likable person, and of course, looking at your CV or resume, building work experience. In terms of what extracurricular activities I participated in, before I tell you something about myself, I think back to what I said about not being prescriptive, I had a friend who was a dancer her entire life and was pursuing professional dancing. And then she had a pivot last moment, decided to pursue medicine. And the bulk of her application was her talking about her experiences as a dancer. So that's a unique thing, doesn't seem to be related to healthcare at all. But in terms of her development as a person, that's more important than maybe a couple of hours volunteering at a hospital. So things like that are important to keep in mind, especially when I talk about everyone has their own journey. So for me, some of the things that I did throughout high school was honestly, as I mentioned before, volunteer experiences related to sports and sporting events. I really enjoyed that. And I think I learned a lot from the people, the athletes, and I guess building leadership skills in that setting. And then when I was in university, I spent a lot of time working in, I guess, healthcare adjacent field, which is, I guess, triaging people with mental health concerns. So I spent a lot of time at Western doing work in that sphere. And that, for me personally, led a big portion of my application. And I think that a common question is, oh, do I need to have health-related extracurriculars? I think not necessarily. These opportunities might help you benefit to learn more about the healthcare system, how it operates, but doesn't necessarily need to be something that's on your application. In the example I gave, it's quite obvious that it's not when you first look at it, but then you talk about your development as a person. I think that's more important. I'd be curious to see what anyone else thinks.
That's awesome. Thank you, Justin. And maybe Quynh or Carolyn, if you have any extra thoughts to add on.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with what Justin said. In terms of what things you should do, of course, do things that you enjoy. Don't do things because you think it'll look good on your application or your resume. When you do things that you enjoy, you'll be more passionate, you'll be more engaged, you'll learn more, you'll connect more with the people you're working with. And like Justin said, that says a lot more than a few hours you did just because you thought it would look good. I'd also suggest doing something that you could potentially commit to longer term. For example, like 5 things that you did really in depth for 4 years during your undergrad looks a lot better than 50 things that you did kind of surface level, 1 day volunteering. Even so, quantity doesn't trump quality. You should always go for the things that you can learn from, you can grow from, and the things that you enjoy. Some of the things I did, I think it was a lot of, oh, sorry, Quynh, I'll just like quickly, some of the things that I did during my undergrad were a lot of talking to people in a non-medical context. So I did like Her Campus Western, I did Humans of Western, I did volunteering with Big Brothers Big Sisters in London. And then I even put things down, like I worked at Chat Time on my application, and then I was also in a music program. So I did a lot of, there was a lot of things about accompanying and performing and teaching music there. So they really do want to get to know you as a person. So do the things that you enjoy.
Yeah, I want to bring back to what Max had brought up, what I mentioned about stories in medicine. And it'll come back again and again throughout the application process for this career path. But medicine is about narratives. And every step along the way when you're applying, you have to tell a story about yourself. Imagine, you know, being on the other side. And it's easier for me to say now. I remember how nervous I was putting this application together. I remember all these questions, all of these concerns, you know, and now I have the privilege of sitting on the other side of the table. And once again, this is my experience. And I probably know more about the process at the University of Toronto. So I can't say that this applies to everyone, but I imagine it's similar. That there is no cookie cutter shape that we're trying to put people in. I had a hard time believing that as well after I crossed over to being a first year medical student, right? There is no checkbox that we're ticking off, at least from the University of Toronto. But there are descriptors, there are qualities of a good physician that the universities across Canada have agreed upon, that these are the type of qualities that we want to teach and develop in future physicians in serving the Canadian population. So those are things that we then attribute down to your application at the undergraduate level to see, you know, what are your potentials in meeting these qualities of, you know, being a good person, of being a relatable person, of being a long-time learner, of being curious about science, about medicine, right? About being a team leader. And so I think that's where extracurriculars play an important role in exploring yourself, your interests, right? It's going into medicine is a huge commitment, a huge financial commitment, a huge time and effort commitment. And we can speak a little bit more about that in question period. So making those explorations to ensure that this is what you want for the right reason is really important. And I think that's where things outside of the classroom is so important. What you do really doesn't matter. Those of you who have gone through the application process, and particularly in Ontario, the OMSAS application, know that there's a section where you fill out all of your extracurricular activities. And that's one of the ways for you to tell a story about yourself. And every year I get questions from mentees, you know, do I have to fill up all the slots? What type of things should I put in? How far back do I go, right? If you think it's important to tell the story about who you are, I think that's what directs your answer. But from the perspective of someone who reviews these applications, I don't really care if someone listed 40 or 20. I don't have a checkbox in terms of, you know, did this person volunteer in the hospital? Did they go abroad and do something? Did they teach some healthcare class? That doesn't really matter. It's reading through it, skimming through it, and seeing, oh, there's something interesting about this person. Would I want to hear a little bit more about this? And most importantly, would I want this person on my team? Right? As a resident, would I want this medical student to be on call with me at night and trust that they would call me if there's something? as a staff physician, would I want this resident taking care of one of my patients? All right, those are the types of questions that are running through our head when we review these applications. So for me, you know, some of my early interest from high school into undergrad was always into like leadership and capacity building for the community. So I did a lot of things in student politics, student government. And I think that helps tell my story of what I'm interested in, where I want to go in my career, and shows a little bit more depth to me beyond just, you know, Quynh Huynh, XX student from this university with this GPA and this MCAT score. So I think that's your opportunity. And so following your heart in terms of, you know, if you have no experience, like you don't have anyone in your family who's been in science or medicine, you've never volunteered, then that's a great opportunity to at least, you know, see what the hospital is like, what medicine is like. But that doesn't mean that you have to spend all 4 years doing just that. If your love is in piano, like Carolyn, pursue that, right? If you love writing poetry like Max, pursue that, because that's what's going to add depth to you as a person, to your reflections, and then consequently to the narrative that you're going to say in your application, and most importantly in your interview.
Thank you, Quynh. That's really insightful. As someone who is in a pretty predominantly pre-med undergraduate program, I can attest that a lot of my friends are under the idea that it has to be a super medical school driven extracurriculars that have to partake in. So it's great to provide that outsider view and some perspective. So thank you. Okay, so I guess we'll move on to the next discussion topic, which is a subset of extracurricular activities, which is research. So as we know, many medical school applications tend to have a section to ask about what research you have done. So perhaps our panelists can provide some insight as to how important is it to get research, and how would someone get a research opportunity, especially early on in an undergraduate career. So maybe Max, you can start us off with this question.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll preface by saying, like Quynh said, especially if you don't have family members or loved ones who are in medicine or in science in general, research can be a great opportunity to learn about the process of, how we generate evidence, which is really the basis of medical decision making, and also to gain a lot of transferable skills in communication and teamwork and presenting, all of that stuff. For me, I got involved in lots of different kinds of research during my undergrad. At one point, I was thinking about doing graduate studies in research, or MD, PhD, etc. And so I was doing epidemiological research in asthma and allergy, as well as qualitative research in youth mental health, some global health research, really just trying out different types of things. But in terms of my advice for getting a research position, because I know this is a very common question that people ask, I think a large part of it is trying to personalize things as much as possible. So if you're applying to a research position or just cold emailing or cold contacting people, really look into the person, look into their lab, their research, and why you would want to be involved with that type of research. Is it a personal connection with that type of research, or is it something specific to one of the research questions that you find really interesting? And make that known when you're contacting these people about why is it that you care. And then the second part is, making sure that it's a two-way street. When you're working with someone, you want to make sure that they're a good mentor, hopefully, and that they care about you as a person and as a mentee. And not everyone, not all researchers are created equal. Some people have more time or energy to dedicate to mentorship, but you want to make sure that they're someone who, is going to support you in your career, no matter if you go into research or not. And because hopefully they'll also write you a reference letter if that's something you care about.
Thank you, Max.
Sorry, Michelle. I agree with Max. I think one thing to mention that perhaps some people don't believe is that not everybody has the same level of research commitment in becoming a physician. And once you're a physician, you also depending on your interest, you don't always have to be involved with research, right? So it's also kind of tying back to that extracurricular activity. You know, it's kind of important to explore so that you at least understand some basic skills, but not something you have to kill yourself over to dedicate if you don't like it. And there's so many different types of research. And I hope, you know, I'm dating myself a little bit, but I hope that now high school and junior years in undergrad is giving you a little bit more exposure that research is not just a pipette at a bench. And because that was the view that I kind of had coming out of high school, right? Max and I both mentioned epidemiological research on our population, data-driven. There's lots of different things, right? So that's where I think using your coursework as the first stepping stone in understanding, you know, like where some of the stuff that your professors are talking about in your courses come from. Getting involved with research is lots of different things. I would suggest those of you who are in high school or starting in your junior years, you know, keeping an eye on like work study programs in your universities. That's often a way for people to get research assistant positions that you can actually get paid for as well, which helps. And then a lot of people volunteer in labs. Another way is to talk to your TAs, so graduate students who are involved in your courses, about how to get involved with their research programs. And then one of the cool things about being at some of the major universities, you know, in our province is that it's not weird to send someone an email and saying, hey, you know, I'm interested in, but be genuine about it. Like do a little bit of background work, like look up, you know, some of their papers. If you're actually interested in joining their lab, you gotta do some work. You can't just send the same 3 paragraphs to everybody and just kind of, right? Because they're probably getting a lot of those inquiries as well. And then a lot of universities and hospitals also have summer research programs for students. That's another way for people to get involved in as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Quynh. So we'll move on to another topic, which is job shadowing and clinical experience. So this can be a term that many people have heard of, but perhaps don't know much about. So maybe can some of the discussion of, some of the panelists maybe shed light onto what quantifies as like clinical experience, how to get it, and how is it important? So maybe, yeah, Quynh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this is one of those things that is definitely not a checkbox on the application, right? That you've gone to a doctor's office and that you've watched them do their work, or that you've spent, you know, longitudinal time, you know, over weeks or months being in that, you know, environment or atmosphere. I think if anything, this is about personal exploration. It's about learning about you as a person, you know, so several of us have already mentioned, you know, if you have never been exposed to this, but think that medicine is where I want to go, then, you know, there's an opportunity for you to see what a doctor does in a day of a life, or what the inside of a hospital looks like. And then sure, you explore that if you're interested, but definitely not something you have to do because you're applying to medical school. We also understand that not everybody has that same level of opportunity and that same level of privilege, right? I'm the first one in my family to go to university. I come from an immigrant parents here in Canada. Right, I didn't have my summers. I needed to take on jobs to help pay for university, to help me pursue where I wanted to go next. That being said, if you are interested in pursuing this, like, I think some of the more conventional ways of doing it is keeping an eye out for summer programs or mentorship programs through your university or through specific hospitals. I think probably in the GTA, there's probably more of these types of opportunities than at other universities. And then reaching out to some of our associations. So even within the Vietnamese community, we have an Ontario Vietnamese Medical Association. Through Gabe, I'm offering an opportunity right now in terms of contacting, and I can help connect people, you to people who may be willing to take on students for a day or for an hour to come in and see what it's like to be in their office, if that's something that you're just curious about. I think shadowing and clinical experience is more of a term that we use in medical school to help people like Caroline and Justin and once upon a time Max and I, see and reflect and decide what specialty of medicine we wanted to be in. Because even once you're through the door of medical school, there's still a lot of mysteries and a lot of decisions to be made.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Quynh. So now we're moving on from the whole application side of it to the holistic well-being and, of course, GPA. So as we know, GPA can be a significant portion about your medical school application. So how would you, our panelists, recommend maintaining a good balance between school and attaining that good GPA, as well as your extracurricular activities? And I guess in general, how would you recommend managing your time well in your schooling career? Maybe we have Carolyn start us off.
Sure. In terms of maintaining a good balance between school and extracurriculars, like I said, again, it's really something personal that you have to kind of know yourself for, and how much you can handle. I think it's really good to keep things in perspective and not get too bogged down with GPA. I think at least when I was applying, a lot of people were like, GPA is king. Like, you need a high GPA, you need to study, you need to get that like 95, 98% on each course. And yes, while it's impressive to your friends that you got 98 on a course or 100 on a course, at Western at least, the GPAs are like 85 to 90 is a 3.9, and 85 to 89 is a 3.9, and 90 to 100 is a 4.0. So that's 0.1 difference in GPA. And if you're studying for hours and hours on end to try and get from a 92 to a 98, you're not using your time well. Or even from like an 85 to a 90, that 0.1, is it really worth your time to do hours and hours and hours upon review when you could be taking care of yourself? You could be doing your extracurriculars, which hopefully don't stress you out too much. Or you could be spending time with friends as well, because that's a really important part of keeping the balance and keeping perspective in your journey. I think moving away from that, focus on GPA is a big part of it. And knowing what's realistic and what's going to help your application. I think a lot of schools now, they use a GPA cutoff. I think Western is 3.7. So if you have a 3.7, we have a 4.0, it doesn't matter. It kind of gets you through the door, through that step, and then they don't really look at it anymore in terms of competitiveness. So knowing that, I hope it helps to give you the permission kind of to back away from your studying sometimes and focus on other aspects of your life as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. That's a very important topic to bring up. On that note, if Max or Quynh have anything extra to add, perhaps someone can also, if they want to, touch on any study tips that help them a lot, whether in medical school or the undergraduate career. That'd be awesome.
I'm not sure I have much to add in way of study tips. I'm probably not the best person to ask about that, but I did want to touch on one thing, which was, the mental health part of this question. And a lot of people, stress about grades, among many other things. And mental health is so important, not just as a pre-med, but also as a medical student, post-med school, etc. So I would just encourage everyone, if you're struggling with anxiety, depression, mental health, or, just generally you want someone to talk to, like, reach out to your friends who are going through the same thing, reach out to your loved ones, reach out to your family doctor. That's a plug for family medicine. Reach out to the counselors at your school. There's a lot of people who are willing to talk, and if you need that support, they're there for you. And it's important to just know that you're never in it alone. But sometimes it can be very daunting to take that first step. But I would encourage you to do it if needed.
Thank you for stressing that, Max. We don't have the demographics of who of the audience with us, but those in the kind of the high school or junior undergraduate level. Most universities have a program like an academic counseling program, and those are not for people who are struggling academically. It's actually just to support anyone and everyone in developing good study skills, because I think university is a very busy time. There's so many distractions, there's so many things going on, and like Carolyn said, it's unfortunately you still have to work hard throughout this whole process, but it's the medical school application process is I don't know, I guess in the spirit of the Olympics, it's kind of like the hurdles, right? There's like constant steps you just have to get through, and then GPA, like Carolyn said, is most schools is just getting you to the next level. Like I don't even see those applications, right? Until the computer decides these are the ones that made it past that cut mark, past the MCAT cut mark, and then now get someone to actually review that file and then gets to the interview level. So I would encourage people to explore those academic resources for free at your own university. I think the biggest thing for me was finding good study buddies, right? There are people that you can have a great time with, and then there are people who that you can study well with. People who help you stay accountable to your study and to your timelines, and who you trust to be able to say like, hey, maybe it's time for us to hunker down a little bit. And throughout this process, I think it's also really important. Some of my closest friends are from my pre-med years. Some of my closest and lifetime friends are from my medical school years. And I think that's something that we'll speak about in life in medical school. But I think it's so important and valuable to make sure that you keep in touch with the people outside of medicine or any career that you're in, because we become this like bubble of the same thing. And there's a lot of, you go to class together and then you go have dinner together and you're still talking about the same anatomy case or the same patient that you saw. And then you're constantly always in there. And I think that can sometimes add to burnt out because you can't step away from medicine, right? For the good things, that's great. You celebrate together, but for the bad things, you can never really step away. So I think my family, my partner throughout this whole process, it was not in medicine. I think that was a huge support for me. And then the friends from undergrad who weren't part of medicine, making an effort to see those, keeping up with the things that you enjoy. Like I hope, Carolyn, you find time to still keep up with piano if that's what you enjoy. And Justin, that you still have time or make time to do some of the sports things that you enjoy. And Max, I hope you're still writing poetry. I didn't know that about you, and I love that. So for me, it was, I mentioned earlier, in terms of leadership, it was like youth programs that I was part of. It goes back, and it's like hits multiple birds with the same stone, right? It was like a volunteering thing that I really enjoyed. But there's this camp program called London Camp that I was really passionate about in my early years as an undergrad, and I continue to help develop that program. So it was kind of volunteering at the same time, developing my own skill set at the same time, but it was a huge part of my well-being to reconnect with those friends and that program and that camp every summer as an escape away from medicine, from science, from studying. And so those are the things that I hope that you will kind of. Work-life balance is hard. There's not real balance. It's more at certain times things have to take precedence and priority. At other times, make sure the other stuff get your attention as well. It doesn't always have to be in a balance.
Thank you, Quynh. Thank you, everybody. That was very insightful answers. So actually, Quynh set up a good transition because now we'll actually be talking about the medical school part about the career journey. So our first question for the panel is, I guess, how do your expectations of medical school compare to the realities? For example, me as someone who had a lot of friends on the pre-med track, there's a lot of expectations surrounding that. Medical school is only studying, only work, no sleep, no enjoyment. So I'm hopefully our panelists experience a little differently. And yeah, so perhaps from expectations and realities, you can also talk about, I guess, in general, what medical school is like structurally. So perhaps Justin can start us off.
Sure, yeah, you just mentioned this, the expectation that we'd always be working nonstop all the time. Of course, I can't comment maybe like 30, 50 years ago, and I'm a Mac student, so I also have that perspective as well. I think there are periods like that, but there are also a lot of periods that are more in tune with keeping a good lifestyle. So I think McMaster does a really good job of giving students a lot of self-scheduled time. So whether that's doing your own self-studying, working on extracurriculars, or dealing with life, there's a lot of leeway in how you want to choose to spend your time, especially within the first year and a half. So the first half of medical school. So now I'm in the second part, which is more focused on the clinical rotations. So it's a lot of service-based work. We're working within the hospitals or in the clinics. And of course, sometimes we work to around the schedules of the residents and physicians that we're working with. But of course, there's always time to prioritize on taking care of the things that you have to within your own life. Another thing that's unique to Mac would be the 3-year program. So that's a big question mark for those who consider applying to Mac. I guess the big question is that enough to make yourself a good applicant for further down the road, for example, residency applications? And the, I guess, expectation is that everything is just rushed. You don't have enough time, you don't have any summers. And I think my response to that is honestly pretty corny, but time is what you make of it. Figure out how you operate personally. So I know that while I was at Western, or in undergrad for anybody, I really did not enjoy having a long 4-month summer. I got really bored really quickly. And now currently, I personally really enjoy working throughout the summers. So Mac for me has honestly been great in that regard, especially during the pandemic. I know especially last summer was even more difficult for some colleagues in other schools to, for example, find jobs or any other work or involvement outside of school. And for me, I was just progressing throughout medical school. And as I said, it's very self-directed at Mac. So if I know some people who are really pushing a lot of extracurriculars, and that's what brings them joy outside of their clinical work. And there's other people who prefer to maybe keep that a bit lower and do the things that they have to in their regular lives, especially as the demographics of my class is also very diverse. So some of them have children, some of them are working other jobs too, and it's incredible to hear about these stories. But my point is that everyone approaches medical school differently.
Thank you, Justin. That's a really insightful thing to offer. Perhaps we can have maybe Carolyn or Max elaborate if you have anything else to add, as well as Quynh after.
Sure. I think my expectations going into medical school, part of it was I was very nervous that it would be a lot like the pre-med culture. I know I wasn't too deep into it in my undergrad, but I hear the stories of it being very cutthroat, very intense, almost like people sabotaging each other to try and get that spot into med school. I hope that's not the reality for a lot of you, but I recognize that it exists out there. But the people in my class are very, they're very kind and very, it's a very collaborative environment. I think people are willing to share notes. They're willing to help you understand something. They're willing to take time out of their day to make sure that the people around them are succeeding with them. I think goes back to healthcare being a team effort. Even when we practice or in the hospital, we don't expect one doctor to know everything. We refer to other doctors. We ask allied health, we ask social workers for help to give the patients the best care. And I think that kind of attitude is a lot more prevalent in medical school, where you work together, you support each other. And although it was a bit unexpected for me, I was, of course, it was a pleasant surprise almost. For me, my medical school experience so far, I've only done 1 year, so it was all online because of COVID. So that was a bit not what I expected from medical school. But from talking to older medical students as well, it goes by really quickly. And I feel like after 1 year, you feel like you don't know anything still. And I think I wasn't sure how I felt about that, because you only have 2 years of classroom learning and pre-clerkship before you're in clerkship. So if I'm halfway done and I feel like I don't know anything yet, it's a bit scary. But I think it really depends on like the experiences that you get to do. This summer, I was able to shadow an internal medicine doctor, and although you feel like you don't know anything, things start to come together once you're in the workplace and once you have the supervision of a doctor. So I'd say, like, not to be discouraged. It comes together. They've been doing this for a long time and all our doctors are wonderful. So something must be working right. So don't be too discouraged if it seems difficult in the beginning, because I think it will come together.
Thank you, Carolyn. That's awesome. So perhaps we can have maybe Max and Quynh share a little bit more about the structure of medical school. Like, what do classes consist of, and in general, what's one thing you love or dislike? What one thing you love and one thing you dislike about, I guess, the experience so far?
I can start. Justin shared a bit about the structure of Max Medical School. I went to U of T, so my perspective is a little bit different, but in general, I think most medical schools are structured similarly in that the beginning half usually is classes, sort of similar to undergrad or even more so high school, because everyone goes through the same classes at the same time. And you'll be learning things like anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, clinical skills, lots of classes based around discussion and feedback as well. And so those form the bulk of your first couple of years. And then the latter half is usually focused on gaining clinical experience. So you're in clinic or you're on the wards in the hospital, and really working in a team with residents, staff physicians, nurses, other members of the allied health team to deliver good patient care. And you learn a lot from that hands-on experience of working with patients and working in a team. So that's the general structure, I would say. In terms of, one really good and one really bad memory, I mean, medical school, like everything else, has its highs and lows. For me, I think I went in with very low expectations of medical school. I thought I'd just be, head down grinding, reading books for 4 years. And so I was pretty pleasantly surprised, I would say, that it was a lot of fun at times too. I made some of my best friends in medical school. We've traveled a lot of the world together. And, I think there's a certain camaraderie you get from going through that experience, not just with your close friends, but even, when I see people in the hospital now from my class that I wasn't super close with, but, there'll always be that bond and that recognition that, you went through this together. A lot of people outside medicine may not necessarily understand what you go through. Some of the long 28-hour call shifts, or the satisfaction of helping to deliver a baby, or the frustration when a patient has a negative outcome. There's only certain things that a small group of people will understand, but just going through that with other people is really wonderful.
I'm glad that you kind of all reflected on, the camaraderie in medical school. That the application process is hard. It's very anxiety provoking, of course, for many of you who are interested. And I think one thing that we haven't spoken about is that there's a huge luck component, in my opinion. Every year, there are great candidates who would make excellent physicians, who don't get in for whatever reason. for lots of different reasons. And I think that's very unfortunate. So it's not a perfect system, but it obviously works as we're weeding out the jerks and the people who are doing medicine for the wrong reason that you hear about the rumors of in pre-med. Similar to Max, I went to U of T, and I think one of my anxieties of going to U of T, I came from Queens in undergrad, so I'm used to like a really small town university. We're known for our spirit. We're known for how close we are linked to our university. So coming to U of T for medical school is one of the biggest medical school programs in Canada. I was nervous about the reputation of U of T, that you're a number, that it's continuing to be cutthroat. Everybody's competing for research spots or residency spots. And I was surprised. Max used the same term that I would describe my medical school experience. It's a little bit more like high school. And back in my days, we actually like sat in lecture halls every day. And the U of T program has now been revamped. It's a lot different now. But my favorite part of medical school were the people that I met. Some of my best friends, the people who I call if there's something, something happening in my personal life, and also the people who I call professionally. And I think that's one of the wonderful things that you start networking really early. As a family doctor now, if I have a neuro question, one of my best friends is a senior resident, like almost done her residency in neurology. If I need to send my patient to a surgeon and I want to trust that person, there's someone that I know who's doing that. And so it's kind of medicine is large, but it's a small circle. And the more that you continue in your path, you'll notice that that camaraderie that Max spoke about. Something that I disliked about my career in medicine so far is the paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork in medicine and documentation, things that you'll hear about. But I think there's a lot of paperwork in a lot of different careers as well. But I think maybe it's something that's worth a mention, because we often talk about medicine as like talking to people and seeing people and doing all these good, like a lot of altruistic things. And I think I'm one of those people who have really been advocating for us to be more honest about our experience and some of our difficulties and challenges in this career. I love my job. I love what I do, but that doesn't mean that every day I wake up, let's go to work, right? There are days halfway through work where I wish I was at home and I wasn't doing this. There are days where I miss out on friends' birthday parties. I've missed out on my own daughter's birthdays because I have a cult shift and I have to be in the hospital. Those are the things that you have to, they're trade-offs of the work that you do. And that's why it's so important to stay anchored and know why you're doing this and do it for the right reason. And I urge some of my younger colleagues on this call, save those interview answers that you had on why you went into medicine, and save those answers that you prepare for your CARM score when you apply for residency for the difficult days, right? The days that people aren't very nice to you in medicine, although you're trying to do the right thing and help them. The day when when your first patient dies, that's always something that a lot of us will remember, because that's often not the reason why we went into medicine. But those are the days that will also help to build who you are as a person and make you a better physician, a better human being, if you know how to draw from those experiences.
Thank you, Quynh, and for everyone. That was super insightful, and it's really great to see how passionate you guys are to be able to dedicate yourself to this somewhat difficult journey. So thank you all again for your very genuine insights. I guess we'll move on to our next discussion topic, which is what is life like after medical school? So in here, we just asked the panelists, in general, what is residency? In general, how do you choose a specialty? And I guess what are fellowships? So perhaps we can have Max start us off.
Yeah, so I think this is a bit far down the line for some of you, but I think it's helpful to have an idea of what life is like after medical school as well. And so once you finish medical school, you're technically a doctor, but you're not allowed to independently practice until you finish residency. The length of residency depends on the specialty, but often ranges from 2 to 5 years, plus possibly additional fellowships, which is a couple of years of extra training that you do on top of that. During medical school, you do rotate through all the different types of specialties for the most part. So everyone in medical school does a bit of family medicine, internal medicine, emerge, surgery, pediatrics, et cetera, et cetera. And so that gives you a good idea of exposure to different specialties and what you might be interested in. And then, of course, you can do research or get involved in other opportunities that could help to solidify your career decision. But hopefully that just gives you a little bit of an idea of what life is like after.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Max. And if Quynh has anything else to add.
I think that was a great discussion.
Okay, that's incredible. Okay, thank you guys so much. So for the final question of the general discussion, maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, what is some advice that you would give to your younger self about pursuing medicine with the knowledge you have now? So we'll go from the order. Start with Carolyn.
That's a great question. I still consider myself to be pretty young and pretty early in my medical school journey. But especially listening to my older colleagues, I think one of the things, and it's a bit general, not really specific to medicine, would be kind of don't rush and enjoy life. I feel like a lot of times there's a big rush to get into medicine, like, oh, which schools accept applicants out of 3rd year, or you have to get accepted after 4th year, or you're kind of lost and you don't know what to do. But there's a lot of time there for growth and for development and for understanding yourself, and also reasons why you might want to go into medicine or why that might be a good choice for you. In the grand scheme of things, whether you get in after 4th year, whether you get in 5 years after, it's not going to make a huge difference. And like Justin and Max said, there's a huge diversity in the people that we see in our classes. There are people with kids, there are people who are married, there are people who have done 2 master's degrees, a PhD, and there are people who have just been working for the last 10 years and decided to go into medicine. We've been saying this for the whole hour, that it really is your own personal journey. So take the time to reflect, and try not to let the people around you influence too much what you think you should be feeling or what you think you should be doing. That's what I would tell myself. I felt like there was a lot of pressure, but you do want to go into this on your own terms and know that you want it, and know that you will be able to dedicate your time and your energy to it.
Thank you, Carolyn. That's really awesome advice. I guess we'll move on next to Justin.
Yeah, it's something I think about quite often. I think the first thing that I would say to, I guess, a younger version of myself would be have fun with the process, because it is a long one. Of course, I'm still young, but if you enjoy what you do, it makes it just a little bit easier. And pairing that with constantly reevaluating, and I talked about this a bit earlier, but I think it's actually pretty essential to question your motivations, intentions, and goals multiple times. As I mentioned, I'm still doing that. I'm thinking about a time maybe like 2 months ago where I was after like a 26-hour call with no sleep, and I questioned my decision to pursue medicine. I was considering I guess speaking to like a counselor and possibly dropping out after that. And that was very recent. But then from that, I kind of learned a bit more about myself. And I do this like very, very often. It's important too. And then what Quynh mentioned earlier was when you do that over and over, even before medicine, you start to build a story or a narrative, not only in your extracurriculars, but understanding of yourself that would help you make a stronger application for medical school. So yeah, enjoy the process, but also think about your past experiences and how that fits into who you are as a person.
Thank you, Justin. That's really great. Okay, I guess we'll move on to Max next.
I think Carolyn and Justin both touched on the idea of enjoying the process, which I certainly agree with. I think what I would add is also to trust the process itself. I'm a big basketball fan, so a bit of a reference there. But I think a lot of people entering medical school, myself included, have this imposter syndrome. There's so many talented people who have potential to be great physicians. Like, what is it about me that makes me specially qualified to do that? And so you start to doubt yourself and whether or not you have a place in medicine and whether or not you would make a good, competent physician, which is a very difficult thing to try and do. So, one of the questions in the document that I saw is, do you ever have doubts about medicine? All the time. And I think that's natural. A lot of people have that. But, to that end, I think as you start to go through medical school, you realize that it's okay to forget things and learn things again. And that's a natural part of learning. And I can say now, having finished medical school, I feel like I can trust in the process that medical school prepares you well to, become the type of doctor that you want to be, and feeling a lot better about my place in medicine now. But I think it's very natural to have a lot of doubts along the way.
Thank you, Maxwell. And lastly, we have Quynh.
I want to thank all of you for being, showing your vulnerabilities where you are. And I hope you've heard this before. It's not your first time, but I'm sorry to mention it again, that this imposter syndrome doesn't end. At the end of our residency, we write these big board exams. And so it's commonly said that that's when you know the most in your medical career, at the end of your medical school. So Justin soon, or Max in June, and at the end of your residency. And yet, I still have days where I'm like, what's going on, right? It's one of the side effects of this career. So I think what Max said really, really resonated. And it's a great reminder to myself as well, that you trust that you've gone through the process, that you know more than you think you do. It comes back, just like Carolyn said, that when she shadowed her internist. I think for me, an advice that I would give to my younger self, I have a little bit, I wouldn't say it's unconventional. It's not true. There's lots of people who do grad studies and work and go into medicine. I even have friends who was, he was a teacher for 10 years and then decided to apply to medical school. So very different life circumstances. So everybody has their own stories. But I would tell my younger self that it's okay to ask for help. I think it's important to put our pride and ego into check. It's okay to ask for people how they got into it, to review your application, to review your responses for your interview, to talk through the answer of like why you want to go into medicine. And for anyone who is considering medicine, after undergrad or towards the end of undergrad and feeling like, you're going to have a hard time competing with people who've been preparing for this since day one of undergrad, that there is lots of people willing to help you. And it's you who need to take that step for yourself. If you're doing this for the right reasons, if this is what you're passionate about, then do pursue it, even if it seems really difficult. And if it doesn't happen the first time, then do spend an honest amount of time reflecting on what may have gone right and wrong. And perhaps there's a friend or a mentor in your life who can be honest with you and help you navigate that reflection to decide what would be your next career step. That's a very common question that I get among undergraduate students. And when do we call it a final application? Should I apply again, or is it too late? And my answer would be it's never too late. It's your life. You can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, everyone, for your answers. As someone again who is had a lot of friends and myself on the track, it's great to see the vulnerability and genuinity from you guys, because as someone younger, it's really easy to see, like, imagine that everyone is so perfect, has it together, know exactly what they're doing as they grow older. So it's great again to see that vulnerability. So now we'll be moving on, I believe, to the Q&A portion. So as a heads up for everyone, if you haven't submitted a question yet, you can submit it on the document that's in the chat. Unfortunately, if we run out of time, we'll be sure to have our panelists answer these questions for you and send it out after the meeting. but we'll try to address as many questions as we can during the session right now. So let's start with some general questions, and I guess any of our panelists can volunteer. So here's a general one. Have you guys ever encountered any older medical students or any medical students that actually have children? Maybe perhaps Maxwell and Quynh might have better insight on this, but
I think I would say that all of us probably have classmates who are at different life stages in our class. And then personally, I got married during medical school, and then I finished my medical school, and then during residency, I had my first child. So that's a whole story in itself. And when people get there, I'm happy to connect and also talk about how to navigate that process.
That's awesome to hear, and it just goes to show that medical school is not, it doesn't have to be something you can do like early on, know exactly when to start going through it. You can go at any stages of your life, as Quynh said, so that's awesome. And here, another question is about letters of recommendation. So for applying to medical school, oftentimes they will ask for a few letters of recommendation. So the question here asks is how many letters should you aim to have? How do you ask for a good letter of recommendation? And also, who would you suggest going to for your letters of reference?
I can go. And Justin and Carolyn can correct me if I'm wrong, since I think they went through the process a bit more recently. I think you need 3 letters of reference generally, if I'm not mistaken. There's no real rule of thumb about who you need to ask, but I would say people who can speak to maybe different aspects of your character or experiences. And then in terms of how to go about asking, I like to ask, can you write me a good reference letter or like a strong reference letter? And I think that word is important because, some people might say, sure, I'll write you a reference letter, and then they write you a pretty average one, and that's not super helpful either. And then I would also say, you can offer to summarize maybe some of your experiences of working with them, or some really good examples of, qualities that you would want them to highlight. Either offering that up front or offering to provide them that if needed, shows that, this is something that you care about, and also will help them actually write a strong letter.
I can add a bit more onto that. I know there was I guess more of a myth when I was applying that, it needs to be a particular set of people. So for example, if you're at a university, you need an academic letter from one of your professors. Being at Western, my classes were always above like 400 people each. So there are some profs I've never spoken to once, or I've never been within maybe like 50 meters of them. And so I didn't get a single letter from any of my profs because I didn't want them to. And as Max said, you wanted a strong reference letter. So ones that I got were people that I knew from past experiences that I worked with on a very close level. So some very, I guess, stronger extracurriculars from high school. I actually reached out to one of my high school teachers that I worked with for probably hundreds of hours, and they wrote me a reference letter, and some extracurriculars at Western that were not related to coursework at all. So I think it's more of a myth that you need a professor to write you an academic reference letter.
Let me spill another secret on the other side of the table, at least in my experience. When I go through a file, references tend to be very positive. They say good things about people, and after you go through your 30th application in the same night, they all start to sound very similar. So I think it's really important that you just avoid being the red flag. And I don't know if Max just has natural, really good insight for applications, or we got the same advice because we went to the same school. As someone who have written these reference letters and get asked about this, I really appreciate when people ask, can you write me a strong reference letter in support of this, blah, 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 right? Because it gives me an out when I really feel like I can't write a really good application letter, right? Because the worst thing about a reference letter is not it being the best ever, but it being a bad one, right? Just like little things that, and I've seen this on medical school applications, on residency applications, right? So you just need to make sure that it's an overall positive letter. It gets through a hurdle to get you to interview, because that's where you can, you know, show more of your story. So don't stress out about the reference letters as much as we tend to. I feel like there's a lot of stresses over references. There's also like the big ethical question that comes up every year in terms of certain references asking you to write them, and then they look it over or sign off on it. And I think that's very personal. I think that, you know, you have to reflect on what you're comfortable with and think about what type of relationship you have with that person. If they can't come up with some good things or even some positively neutral things to say about you, you just don't want a bad letter. But other than that, it's really not. It's something that we really kind of scroll through. Is there anything red flags? Right? This person was great. They did this. They did this. Great. Moving on.
I think those are all great tips. With 𝗏𝗄𝗃, at least I know that this year they're moving away from the like free reference letter to a confidential assessment form. So each of the people that you choose to be your reference, they kind of have a format to follow. So they ask very specific questions like, would this applicant be a good physician? Can you rate this applicant for their communication, their problem solving, their professionalism, their empathy? So I would suggest looking those over, making sure that your referee or your reference can answer those questions well and answer them positively. And maybe you could even, they're on the 𝗚𝗏𝗃 site, so you could send those questions to them ahead of time to give them a chance to look it over so that they can assess whether they can write you a strong reference letter, like Max and Quynh and Justin had said.
Thank you. That's really great advice from everybody. So our next question is more about when to apply for medical school. So some people are asking, is it normal to apply after 4th year or to have a gap for 1 year after graduation? And a similar question also asks, if you don't have enough extracurricular activities, do you think it's possible to go to grad school first, get the master's degree, and then apply? Or do you think it's still possible to catch up in terms of extracurricular activities beforehand, I guess? So yeah, does anyone have any insights about when to apply for medical school, I guess, and applying later than your typical 4 years?
I think the honest answer to this question is you apply when you feel like you're ready, right? That you have your ducks lined up, right? So you have to understand, you still have to do the work and looking at all those criteria, things that Carolyn and Justin has kind of spoken about, the different aspects, and see, you know, like, do you have the minimum MCAT score? Do you have the GPA? Do you have this? And decide, okay, I'll take my chance and put this together, or I have a weak spot, I need to work on that. I'd like to answer the part about the grad school. I think you have to decide what to do, one, in terms of what part to strengthen your application, but also in terms of parallel planning for your career, right? If it doesn't work out, if you change your mind, what are you going to do next? And so if research of grad school is what you honestly would like to pursue, I think those are the right reasons to do it. If doing grad school to buy you time for another cycle of the medical school application, as someone who's gone through graduate school, I would advise against that. Obviously, this is very personal. You make your own decision. But my reason being, it's expensive. It takes a lot of time. And grad school can be a lot of work as well. Right? So if it's not going to lead you somewhere else, you don't have to have, I don't believe that my grad school experience really made me stand out more than another applicant when I applied. I think what it helped me with was, one, helping me understand myself and helping me have a better answer to why I wanted to go to medical school. because it added to my narrative, the experiences that I had. It also helped with my skills in terms of being a lifelong learner, being a scholar, as we call it in the realm of medicine. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Quynh. Okay, so our next question is, are there any, what are some things to avoid in your medical school application? For example, what are some red flags that might be on your personal statement or biography or so forth? If there are any.
You guys jump in at any time if you have things to add. Maybe I'll take a stab at this. I think red flags depend on the person reviewing your file and the person interviewing you. You never know who's going to be at the other side of the table and what type of biases that they bring. But hopefully in the process, we balance it all out because different people might be involved at various stages of reviewing your application. And every school has its own process, right? So I can't speak to lots of different things, but most schools work under the premise that we're evaluating people using multiple components. So getting through the various cutoffs and hurdles, and then having people review your file application. Some schools, those people interview you. Some schools, the people interviewing you have actually not seen your application. Some schools use multiple mini interviews versus personal one-on-one interviews. And that so that your performance is not just based on one thing, but we've looked at you from lots of different perspectives. So I think it's hard to answer kind of red flags because it's very personal from the person evaluating you. But I think the stuff that the school tries to be fair about in terms of making sure that all evaluators are flagging are things quite common sense, right? Like that you're respectful, that you're a decent human being, that you have a good head on your shoulder, right? Those are things that make a good person, not just, but it's so important for physicians to have those skills. And then in the application process, I just want to, I'll link it here. But a lot of schools, and I know U of T is quite transparent about how we evaluate our medical students and our residents through the application process in terms of demonstrating. I talked about those qualities that the medical schools have agreed upon in terms of training physicians. And these, we call them the CanMed role. And I put a link there. So if you look at the various components of the medical school application, we're really looking at how you measure up to these qualities. And at the University of Toronto, for some of our programs, I know for family medicine residency, we actually rank people based on where do you think they'll slide to be a scholar, to be a leader, to be an advocate. I don't know if there's changes in the application cycle that's coming up, but in previous years, the way that U of T does our applications with the mini essays, those line up to these CanMed's role. That's how we evaluate you. And the various components of your extracurricular, your biographical sketch is your opportunity to demonstrate how you meet up to these roles. And that's where the references is also fallen in, right? In terms of thinking, when you put your reference together, can these people help you demonstrate these qualities that medical school is looking to train people for?
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Quynh. And so I think that concludes all the time we have for the Q&A. However, as mentioned before, feel free to add your last thoughts on the document, and we'll be sure to have our panelists, I believe, look over the questions, answer them, and we'll send out the unanswered questions to the audience later on after this webinar. But in the meantime, thank you again so much to our panelists for coming out, taking the time to share all of their very insightful experiences about the medical school journey. We asked our audience members to please fill out this event feedback form that's linked in the group chat at the bottom. We would really appreciate it to improve our events for the future. And in addition, we highly encourage you to check out the organization's website, which I will send again to, ideally, if you could support in any way, that'd be incredible. So thank you all very much again. And we hope you all have a lovely day.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
And of course, the panelists can stay back just for a little bit after the webinar. Thanks again, everyone, for coming out.